Hello and welcome back to my channel. I've got a fresh story lined up for you today and I'm excited to have you here. I hope you enjoy it. Let's dive in. Mike Thompson stood in his garage, carefully organizing his fishing equipment for the upcoming weekend trip. At 38, he still carried the same excitement as a teenager for these outings with his high school friends. Having worked as a postal worker for 15 years, Mike had developed a deep respect for organization, which was evident in the precise way he arranged his tackle box. Humming softly, he picked up his prized fishing rod, a shining beauty Rachel had gifted him 3 years ago on their anniversary. The familiar weight of it brought a smile to his face. Moments like these, surrounded by the familiar smells of motor oil and freshly cut grass, were when Mike felt most at ease. The garage door was slightly open, letting a warm breeze drift in, unknowingly to Mike, creating an unintentional sound pathway to the kitchen. As he reached for his cooler, Rachel's voice floated in from the house, loud and clear. "He's gone for the weekend. You can come over for a wild night." Mike's hand froze on the cooler handle. Her words lingered in the air as sharply as the fishing lures scattered across his workbench. For a split second, he thought he had misheard. Rachel, his wife of 12 years, couldn't possibly mean that. But as the weight of her words sank in, Mike's mind raced, piecing together signs he had noticed but ignored over the past few months. Rachel's new wardrobe, the late nights at work, her sudden interest in the gym, each memory now took on a darker, more troubling meaning. Mike forced himself to take a deep breath, his hand trembling as he resumed packing. Every action felt deliberate, as he made a conscious effort to maintain the appearance of normalcy. The fishing trip, which had consumed his excitement all week, now seemed like a distant concern. Once the car was packed, Mike gathered himself and walked into the house. Rachel was in the kitchen, her phone nowhere to be seen, looking every bit like the loving wife he had always thought she was. "All packed, honey?" she asked, smiling warmly at him. Mike nodded, forcing a smile of his own. "Yeah, just about. I need to grab my toiletries." He leaned in for a goodbye kiss, but as their lips met, the once pleasant scent of her perfume now felt overpowering and suffocating. Pulling away, he managed to keep his mask on with effort. "Have a great time," Rachel said, squeezing his arm gently. "I'll miss you." "I'll miss you too," Mike replied, the words feeling hollow in his mouth. "Love you." As he drove away, Mike watched Rachel through the rearview mirror. She stood on the porch, waving like the picture-perfect, devoted wife. But even before he turned the corner, he caught her reaching for her phone, undoubtedly to pick up where she had left off. Mike's mind was a whirlwind as he drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Instead of heading toward the lake where his friends were waiting, he found himself pulling into a quiet spot with a clear view of their house. He put the car in park and leaned back, his heart pounding in his chest. What was he doing? Part of him screamed to confront Rachel, to demand the truth. Another part insisted this was all a misunderstanding, that there must be a reasonable explanation. But the cold, logical part of his mind, the part that had made him an efficient postal worker for 15 years, knew better. So Mike waited. His fishing gear sat untouched in the back of the car, as his eyes remained fixed on the house he had called home for over a decade, the place where, at this very moment, his wife was preparing to betray him. Dusk settled over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across perfectly kept lawns and identical houses. Mike sat vigil in his car, his body stiff from hours of stillness, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. He texted his friends, fabricating a story about a family emergency. They were disappointed but understanding. If only they knew the true crisis unfolding before him. At 8:43 p.m., a red sports car pulled onto their street. Mike's stomach turned as he recognized the vehicle. It was Steve's. Steve, Rachel's co-worker of 2 years. Steve, who had come to their barbecues and complimented Mike's grilling. Steve, who was now confidently walking up to Mike's front door, about to sleep with his wife. With trembling hands, Mike pulled out his phone and began recording. The porch light illuminated Steve's face clearly as Rachel opened the door. They shared a brief hug before Steve disappeared inside. Mike zoomed in, ensuring every detail was captured. He felt sick, but he kept recording. As the evening dragged on, Mike recorded the telltale movements of the lights inside the house. At 9:15 p.m., the living room lights dimmed. He imagined them sitting on the couch he and Rachel had picked out together, sharing a bottle of wine, laughing at private jokes. At 9:30 p.m., the bedroom light flicked on, sending a sharp pain through Mike's heart. It was their bedroom, the place they had shared countless nights of laughter, conversations, and intimacy. Now it was the stage for her betrayal. Throughout the night, the bathroom light blinked on and off intermittently. Each flicker felt like a stab to Mike's heart, but he stayed in his car, fighting nausea and resisting the overwhelming urge to burst into the house and confront them. At 11:52 p.m., Movement in the backyard caught Mike's attention. His breath hitched as he spotted Rachel and Steve heading toward the hot tub, the very one Mike had installed as a surprise for their 10th anniversary. With steady hands, Mike zoomed in, capturing the incriminating evidence of their closeness. The hours dragged on and exhaustion weighed heavily on Mike, but he knew he had to keep going. Despite the overwhelming emotional turmoil, he understood the importance of what he was doing. Each photo and every video became a crucial piece of proof, a shield against the lies Mike knew would inevitably come. Despite his determination, Mike dozed off, only to jolt awake at 5:17 a.m., momentarily confused. Then, as he saw Steve's sneaky departure from the house, reality came rushing back. Mike grabbed his phone and recorded Steve's shameful walk to his red sports car. As Steve drove off, Mike sat in his car, feeling empty. The long night had left him utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. However, as the first rays of sunlight began to rise over the horizon, a new feeling began to stir in Mike's heart. It was no longer just sadness or betrayal, it was a firm resolve, a determination to protect himself, to seek justice, and to regain control over the situation Rachel had forced upon him. Taking a deep breath, Mike started his car. He had a long journey ahead, both figuratively and literally. But first, he had a fishing trip to fake and evidence to secure. By Sunday evening, Mike pulled into his driveway, his fishing gear untouched, and his mind a battleground of conflicting emotions. As he turned off the engine, he saw Rachel stepping out onto the porch, smiling in a way that now seemed grotesque. "Mike, hey honey," she called out, walking over to greet him with a hug. "How was the trip?" As Rachel wrapped her arms around him, Mike caught the faint whiff of an unfamiliar cologne lingering on her skin. His stomach churned, but he managed to return the embrace, forcing a tired smile. "It was good," he lied, the words bitter on his tongue. "Caught a few nice ones. How about you? Have a quiet weekend?" Rachel nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture Mike now recognized as a sign she was lying. "Oh, just caught up on some reading, did a little cleaning, nothing exciting." As Rachel described her calm weekend at home, each falsehood stoked the fire of Mike's resolve. He nodded at the right moments, asked a few questions, all while mentally noting the inconsistencies. There was a wine glass in the sink, though Rachel claimed she hadn't had a drink. The hot tub cover was slightly askew, despite Rachel insisting she hadn't used it that night. Later that evening, as they lay in bed, Mike found sleep impossible. Rachel's betrayal weighed heavily on him, made even worse by her peaceful breathing beside him in the darkness. With only the faint glow of the alarm clock for company, Mike began to strategize. He mentally logged Rachel's activities, noting the dates, times, and coincidences with Steve's schedule. Tomorrow, he'd begin documenting everything. He needed cold, hard facts, proof that couldn't be explained away. Over the next week, Mike threw himself into his plan with the same methodical precision that made him an excellent postal worker. He volunteered for extra shifts, explaining to Rachel that it was for a special surprise. Her eyes lit up at that, and Mike had to swallow the bitterness rising in his throat. If only she knew. In truth, every extra hour was going into a secret bank account Mike had opened at a different branch. He knew he'd need financial resources for the battle ahead, and he wasn't going to let Rachel's infidelity leave him financially exposed as well. At home, Mike paid closer attention to their teenage daughter, Emma. He noticed her confusion over Rachel's frequent absences, the hurt in her eyes when her mother missed yet another soccer game. Mike's heart ached for Emma, caught in the crossfire of her mother's selfish actions. He began building a stronger connection with his daughter, helping her with homework and really listening when she talked about her day. They started having dinner together on the nights Rachel claimed to be working late, and Mike found himself cherishing these moments of genuine connection amidst the turmoil of his collapsing marriage. All the while, Mike meticulously maintained his usual routine, giving Rachel no reason to suspect that he knew about her betrayal. He kissed her goodbye in the mornings, asked her about her day in the evenings, and even initiated intimacy occasionally to avoid arousing suspicion. Each act felt like a betrayal of his own integrity, but Mike knew it was necessary. He was building a case, gathering evidence, and preparing for the storm that was on the horizon. In quiet moments, when the weight of his knowledge threatened to overwhelm him, Mike reminded himself of what was at stake. This wasn't just about him and Rachel anymore, it was about Emma, their future, and getting justice. So despite the pain, the anger, and the betrayal eating away at him, Mike pressed forward. He kept track of credit card receipts, showing Rachel's odd purchases, lingerie she never wore for him, expensive dinners she never mentioned. He set up a secure email account to communicate with a divorce lawyer, clearly laying out his situation in unemotional terms. Mike spent hours researching Pennsylvania divorce laws, learning how infidelity could affect settlements. He was determined to be ready to protect himself and Emma from the fallout of Rachel's actions. As days turned into weeks, Mike's plans solidified. He was no longer just Mike Thompson, the unsuspecting husband and loving father. He was becoming something more, a man with a mission, a silent storm gathering strength, ready to unleash justice on those who had wronged him. The calm before the storm was nearly over. Soon, Rachel would face the consequences of her actions, and Mike would be prepared. Mike Thompson's life had turned into a carefully constructed facade. To the outside world, he was still the reliable postal worker, the doting husband, and the devoted father. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Over the next month, Mike transformed into a silent investigator within his own home. He observed Rachel's behavior with the precision of a scientist, noting how her late nights at work always seemed to fall on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the same nights when Steve's wife, Sarah, had her book club meetings. Mike's hand trembled slightly as he set up a hidden camera in their living room. The new digital photo frame seemed harmless, a thoughtful gift for Rachel to showcase their family photos. She had no clue it was recording her infidelity in high definition. The first time Mike reviewed footage of Rachel and Steve together in his own home, he felt physically sick. There they were, laughing on the couch he and Rachel had chosen together, drinking wine from the glasses they had received as a wedding present. The evidence was undeniable. Each video clip another blow to his marriage. In an ironic twist, Mike found himself forming a friendship with Sarah, Steve's wife, under the guise of planning a surprise anniversary party for Rachel. Mike reached out to the unsuspecting woman. "Steve talks about you all the time," Sarah gushed during coffee one afternoon. "He says you're the best thing that ever happened to him." Mike nodded, forcing a smile as guilt gnawed at him. He was about to destroy this woman's world, just as his had been shattered, but the alternative, letting her remain in blissful ignorance while her husband deceived her, seemed even crueler. At home, Mike noticed the toll Rachel's lies were taking on their daughter, Emma. The teenager's confusion was clear, her hurt reflected in the way her shoulders slumped and her brow furrowed. "Mom's been working so hard lately," Emma mentioned casually one evening as Mike helped her with her math homework. "I hardly see her anymore." Mike's heart ached. He wanted to tell Emma the truth, to shield her from the pain that was on the horizon. Instead, he simply nodded and changed the subject. Later that week, while tidying Emma's room, Mike found a report card tucked away in a drawer, unsigned by Rachel, just another casualty of her web of lies and distractions. Determined to be the stable presence Emma needed, Mike strengthened his bond with his daughter. He attended every one of her soccer games, feeling a mix of sadness and anger at Rachel's frequent absences. They started a tradition of Sunday morning hikes, where Mike gained precious insight into Emma's thoughts and feelings. During one such hike, as they paused to admire a particularly stunning view, Emma turned to Mike, her vulnerability making her seem younger than her 15 years. "Dad," she asked hesitantly, "is everything okay with you and Mom?" Mike's heart raced. He wanted to unload everything, to share his burden with his daughter, but he knew it wasn't right to place that on her shoulders, at least not yet. "We're just going through a rough patch, sweetie," he said, pulling her into a hug. "But I want you to know, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." As Emma nestled into his embrace, Mike felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for Emma, for her future, for her ability to believe in love. With careful planning, Mike reached out to Rachel's parents, Tom and Linda. Over a casual dinner, he expressed his concern about Rachel's behavior, hinting at potential problems without fully revealing what he knew. "I'm probably just overreacting," he said, watching their reactions closely, "but I thought you should know. Maybe you could keep an eye out at the anniversary party." Tom and Linda exchanged worried glances, and Mike could see the seeds of doubt taking root. He asked them not to confront Rachel just yet, suggesting they observe her behavior themselves at the upcoming celebration. They agreed, their concern for their daughter clear in their worried expressions and soft sighs. In the weeks that followed, Mike consulted his lawyer about custody arrangements. He learned that Pennsylvania favored shared custody, but was reassured that his meticulous documentation of Rachel's behavior and his active role in Emma's life would work in his favor. Mike dedicated himself to gathering more evidence of his involvement as a father. He saved every receipt from school supply shopping, took numerous photos at Emma's events, and maintained a detailed log of the time he spent helping with homework and school projects. Each piece of evidence was another layer of protection for his and Emma's future. As Mike's case against Rachel grew stronger, the storm on the horizon grew nearer. The calm exterior he showed to the world masked the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Soon, the storm would break and Mike would be ready. One day, Mike stood in the kitchen, holding a calendar, with a forced smile on his face. "I've been thinking," he said to Rachel, who was absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. "Our 15th anniversary is coming up. We should do something special." Rachel looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Oh, what were you thinking?" "A party," Mike said, his voice full of enthusiasm he didn't feel. "A big celebration with all our friends and family. We've been through so much, and it's worth marking the occasion properly." Rachel's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. That sounds nice, but isn't it a bit much? Maybe we could just have a quiet dinner, just the two of us. Mike shook his head, keeping his cheerful expression intact. Nonsense. 15 years is a milestone. We should celebrate it with everyone we love. Though Rachel reluctantly agreed, Mike could see her unease, and it only fueled his determination. Over the following weeks, Mike threw himself into planning the party with suspicious enthusiasm. He reserved a private room at the town's most upscale restaurant, known for its romantic atmosphere and exquisite food. The irony wasn't lost on him. Invitations were sent out to family, friends, and co-workers, including Steve and Sarah. Mike took extra care with their invitation, addressing it to both of them, a subtle reminder of the vow Steve was breaking. "We have to invite your parents," Mike insisted when Rachel hesitated. "They'd be hurt if we didn't." Rachel's reluctance was clear, but she couldn't argue without arousing suspicion. Mike watched as she forced a smile and added her parents to the guest list. As the party approached, Mike noticed Rachel growing more anxious. She made several secretive phone calls, her voice low and urgent. Mike recorded each one, adding them to his growing collection of evidence. "Maybe we should scale back the party," Rachel suggested one evening, nervously fidgeting with her blouse. "It just seems like a lot." Mike took her hand, suppressing a shudder at the contact. "Nonsense," he said gently but firmly. "You deserve to be celebrated properly." The week before the party, Mike moved forward with the next step of his plan. Using a secure, anonymous email account, he sent a carefully crafted message to the HR department where Rachel and Steve worked. The email subtly hinted at an improper relationship in the workplace, suggesting that the company review communication logs and security camera footage. Mike knew this would raise alarms. He could already picture the HR team rushing to investigate and the rumors beginning to spread. This was the start of the downfall of Rachel and Steve's carefully built lie. 2 days before the party, Mike overheard Rachel having an argument with Steve over the phone. Pressing his ear to the study door, his heart pounded as he listened to their heated exchange. "We need to slow things down," Rachel said, her voice laced with anxiety. "People are starting to notice, and the party this weekend is too risky." Steve's response was muffled, but Mike could still detect the resistance in his tone. "You're overreacting," Steve insisted. "No one suspects a thing. We just need to act normal." As Rachel continued to argue, Mike quietly withdrew, a grim smile tugging at his lips. The cracks in their deception were starting to show. The night before the party, Mike completed his final preparations. The slideshow he had created was a work of art, filled with cheerful photos of their life together, perfectly designed to highlight their seemingly flawless marriage. Hidden within the code, however, was a devastating reveal, ready to be unleashed at the press of a button. While Rachel slept beside him, blissfully unaware of the storm approaching, Mike carefully sealed copies of his evidence into envelopes. Each was labeled with a recipient's name: Rachel's parents, Sarah, close friends and colleagues. Tomorrow their world would collapse, and Mike would be the one holding the hammer. The private room at Lee Chateau buzzed with excitement. Soft lighting bathed the elegantly arranged tables in a warm glow, and the quiet clink of champagne glasses filled the air. To the untrained eye, this looked like nothing more than a joyful anniversary celebration. Rachel's parents, Tom and Linda, stood near the bar, their eyes fixed on their daughter. The concern Mike had planted in their minds weeks earlier had clearly grown, evident in the deep furrow on Tom's brow and the tightness in Linda's mouth. "She seems off, doesn't she?" Linda whispered to her husband, watching as Rachel laughed a little too loudly at something a co-worker said. Tom nodded, his frown deepening. Mike was right to be worried. Something's wrong here. Across the room, Steve and Sarah arrived, their entrance causing a ripple of tension that only Mike seemed to detect. Steve's eyes darted around nervously, deliberately avoiding Rachel. Oblivious to the underlying drama, Sarah smiled warmly as she handed Mike a beautifully wrapped gift. 15 years, she said with genuine warmth. "You and Rachel are such an inspiration." Mike accepted the gift with a gracious smile, suppressing the guilt bubbling inside. Soon, very soon, Sarah's world would crumble. But Mike reminded himself that facing the truth, no matter how painful, was better than living in a lie. As the evening wore on, Mike played the role of the perfect host. He mingled with the guests, charming and attentive, all while fully aware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. He noticed a small group of Rachel's co-workers whispering in a corner, likely gossiping about the recent HR investigations. The trap was closing in. Midway through dinner, Mike stood and gently tapped his glass with a spoon. The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward him. Rachel looked up, a brief flash of anxiety crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Friends, family," Mike began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through him. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate 15 years of marriage with Rachel and me." He clicked a button on the remote in his hand, and a slideshow appeared on the large screen behind him, showcasing happy moments from their life together, photos from their wedding day, vacations, the day Emma was born. "When I first met Rachel," Mike continued, scanning the room, "I thought I was the luckiest man in the world, and for many years I believed that." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes, her smile faltering. If Mike hadn't known better, her performance might have fooled him. "But life," Mike went on, his tone shifting slightly, "has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? Sometimes the surprises are wonderful." And sometimes he pressed the remote again, and the slideshow abruptly switched. Gone were the happy memories. In their place were photos of Rachel and Steve together, intimate text message exchanges, and video clips that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The room descended into a shocked silence, the kind of silence so heavy it felt tangible. Mike's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "And sometimes, those surprises destroy everything you thought you knew." What happened next was chaos in slow motion. Rachel, her face drained of color, attempted to stand but collapsed back into her seat. Her father, fury etched in every line of his face, stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Steve tried to make a break for the door, but Sarah stood in his way, her face a mix of devastation and rage. "How could you?" she screamed, her voice raw with pain. Mike, calm and composed, continued his narration. He laid out the extent of Rachel and Steve's betrayal, playing audio recordings of their conversations and displaying screenshots of their secret communications. With each piece of evidence, the weight of the situation pressed heavier on the room. The final slide appeared: divorce papers, already signed by Mike. The room erupted. Rachel's sobs were almost drowned out by the angry voices of friends and family. Some of Rachel's co-workers were already on their phones, likely contacting HR to report what they had just witnessed. Mike raised his hands, calling for silence. Miraculously, the room quieted, all eyes once again on him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion for the first time that night. "I'm sorry to Sarah. And to Tom and Linda, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I couldn't let this lie continue." He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "I'll be taking some time off work to focus on my daughter. Emma, I ask for your privacy and understanding in the weeks ahead." As Mike made his way to the exit, he handed envelopes to Rachel's parents and to Sarah. "Everything you need to know is in here," he said quietly. "I truly am sorry." The last thing Mike saw before leaving the restaurant was Rachel collapsing to the floor, her carefully crafted world crashing down around her. He felt a brief moment of pity, quickly replaced by a sense of justice served. Stepping into the cool night air, Mike took a deep, steadying breath. The storm had broken, and the truth was out. Whatever lay ahead, Mike was prepared to face it head-on. The morning after the anniversary party, Mike Thompson sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. The house was eerily quiet, almost as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, bracing for the aftermath. It wasn't long before his phone began buzzing non-stop. Rachel had bombarded him with messages and missed calls. Mike ignored them all. He had said everything he needed to last night. Now it was time to deal with the fallout. As the day wore on, friends and family began reaching out with reports. Rachel, it seemed, had started a desperate smear campaign, telling anyone willing to listen that Mike had been controlling and abusive throughout their marriage, and that she had only turned to Steve because of Mike's cruelty. Mike listened calmly to each concerned caller, showing no emotion. When they were done, he would simply respond, "I understand. I'll send you some information shortly." Then he'd hang up and add another name to his list. By the evening, Mike had emailed his carefully collected evidence to everyone in their social circle: text messages, photos, videos, credit card statements, a mountain of undeniable proof of Rachel's cheating and dishonesty. The next morning, Mike walked into Patricia Reeves' office. Her reputation for ruthless efficiency was well known, and Mike had dipped into his overtime savings to afford her services. But as he laid out his case, showing Patricia the evidence he had gathered, he knew it was money well spent. "Mr. Thompson," Patricia said, leaning back in her chair with a predatory smile, "I believe we have a very strong case here. Rachel won't know what hit her." Meanwhile, across town, Rachel sat in her own lawyer's office, her face pale and strained. She had spent the morning frantically trying to delete incriminating emails and texts, only to realize with growing dread that Mike must have already saved everything. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," her lawyer said, his tone grave as he reviewed the evidence Mike had provided. "But I'm afraid you have no leverage here. The infidelity is indisputable, and Mr. Thompson has meticulously documented everything. We'll have to advise you to settle." Rachel's world continued to collapse. Her parents, disgusted by her actions and dishonesty, refused to support her either financially or emotionally. Her calls went unanswered, her letters returned unopened. The comfortable life she had taken for granted was slipping away like sand through her fingers. At home, Mike faced a different struggle. Emma, devastated by the revelations about her mother, had withdrawn into herself. She stopped speaking to both parents, spending hours locked in her room. Mike focused on being a stable presence, keeping their routines as normal as possible. He left meals outside Emma's door, kept her favorite snacks stocked, and continued driving her to and from school in silence. After a week of this, Mike made a decision. He reached out to Dr. Amanda Carter, a therapist specializing in adolescent trauma. "Emma's really hurting," Mike explained during their first consultation, "and as much as I want to help her, I know I can't fix this on my own. She needs professional support." Dr. Carter nodded sympathetically. "You're doing the right thing, Mr. Thompson. Bringing Emma in for therapy is a crucial step in helping her process this." Gradually, with Dr. Carter's help, Emma began to open up. She started joining Mike for meals again and even initiated conversations about small, everyday things like school and her friends. Mike cherished these small victories, seeing them as steps forward in the long journey of healing. Throughout it all, Mike kept careful records. He meticulously logged every moment spent with Emma, saved receipts for all expenses related to her care, and documented any attempts Rachel made to contact or manipulate their daughter. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, Mike's thorough documentation presented a clear and damning case. Rachel's infidelity was undeniable, and Mike's role as Emma's primary caregiver became evident through his extensive records. In court, Patricia Reeves presented their case with conviction. "Your Honor," she said confidently, "Mr. Thompson has been the constant, stable figure in Emma's life. While Mrs. Thompson was engaged in her affair, Mr. Thompson was attending parent-teacher meetings, helping with homework, and providing the emotional support that Emma needed. It is clear that Emma's best interests lie in staying primarily with her father." As Mike listened to Patricia lay out their case, he felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. This wasn't the future he had envisioned when he married Rachel 15 years ago, but he was determined to do what was best for Emma and himself. The battle had begun in earnest, and Mike was prepared to fight with everything he had. As the weeks passed, the consequences of Rachel's choices became even more apparent. The comfortable life she had once known, the respect she had enjoyed in their social circle, all crumbled like a sandcastle against the tide. Rachel's parents, Tom and Linda, who had once been ever present and doting, now refused to speak to their daughter. Rachel's desperate calls went unanswered. Her tear-streaked letters returned unopened. The pain of their rejection gnawed at Rachel constantly. One afternoon, Rachel stood at her parents' front door, her hand raised to knock. She could hear movement inside, knew they were home. But as the minutes ticked by and her knocks went ignored, the harsh reality of her situation finally set in. She had lost not only her husband and daughter, but her entire support system. Steve, the man for whom Rachel had risked everything, turned out to be just as unreliable as Mike had suspected. Pressured by his own impending divorce and the scandal that now surrounded him, Steve cut off all contact with Rachel. His final text to her was brief and cold. "This is too much. Don't reach out to me again." Rachel read and reread the message, tears blurring her vision. She had thrown away 15 years of marriage and hurt her daughter deeply, all for a man who abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. The workplace investigation, triggered by Mike's anonymous tip, ended with devastating consequences. Both Rachel and Steve were fired for violating company policies. The HR manager's words still echoed in Rachel's mind. "Your actions have brought shame to this company. We have no choice but to terminate your employment immediately." In their small town, news spread quickly. The scandal of Rachel and Steve's affair, paired with the dramatic reveal at the anniversary party, made finding new work nearly impossible for Rachel. Gossip followed her everywhere, with sidelong glances and abruptly hushed conversations making it clear she was now an outcast in the community she once called home. Financial ruin loomed over her as she struggled to maintain the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. The house she once shared with Mike now solely belonged to him. Their joint bank accounts were frozen, and she found herself living in a dingy motel on the outskirts of town. The peeling wallpaper and stale air served as constant reminders of how far she had fallen. Meanwhile, Mike's unwavering dedication to being the steady parent was showing results. Emma, still deeply hurt but gradually healing, chose to live primarily with her father. The court had recognized Mike's constant presence in Emma's life and was impressed by the detailed records he kept of his involvement in her daily routines. During one of their therapy sessions, Emma finally opened up about her feelings. "I'm still so angry at Mom," she whispered, "but Dad, he's been my rock through all of this. I don't know what I'd do without him." Dr. Carter nodded encouragingly. "It's okay to be angry. Emma, what your mother did hurt you deeply, but recognizing your father's support and stability is a crucial part of your healing process." The court's decision reflected this. Rachel's visitation rights were significantly reduced due to concerns about her emotional state. She was allowed only supervised visits twice a month, a far cry from the daily presence she once had in Emma's life. As the divorce neared finalization, Rachel made one last desperate attempt to reclaim what she had lost. Late one night, she appeared at Mike's door, her eyes red and pleading. "Mike, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can work through this, can't we? For Emma's sake, for our family." Mike listened calmly, his expression unreadable. Seeing Rachel, once so composed and confident, now broken and begging, stirred a complex mix of emotions in him, but the trust that had been shattered couldn't be rebuilt so easily. "I'm sorry, Rachel," he said, his voice steady but not harsh. "What's done is done. There's no going back. Instead of trying to fix what's already broken, I think you should focus on repairing your relationship with Emma. She still needs her mother, even if things can't go back to how they were." As Rachel's shoulders slumped in defeat, Mike felt an unexpected sense of relief. He had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. In the quieter moments between the legal battles and emotional upheavals, Mike concentrated on helping Emma navigate the complicated emotions of their new reality. They had honest discussions about trust, forgiveness, and the consequences of their choices. "Emma," Mike said one evening as they sat on the porch swing, "I want you to know it's okay to still love your mom. What she did was wrong, and it's okay to be angry about that. But she's still your mother, and it's okay to have a relationship with her if that's what you want." Emma leaned against her father, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "I don't know if I can forgive her," she admitted softly. Mike wrapped his arm around her. "Forgiveness is a journey, sweetheart. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about finding peace for yourself." These conversations, difficult as they were, helped Emma begin to process her feelings. She started seeing Mike not just as her father, but as a man of integrity and strength, someone who modeled how to face challenges with grace and resilience. As the chaos settled, Mike and Emma found themselves forging a new path, their bond stronger than ever after the storm they had endured together. The day the divorce was finalized felt almost anticlimactic after the months of turmoil. Mike sat in the courtroom, his face calm as the judge read the terms. Beside him, Patricia Reeves allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. In the matter of Thompson versus Thompson, the judge intoned, "The court rules as follows. Primary custody of the minor child, Emma Thompson, is awarded to the father. Michael Thompson. Rachel Thompson is granted supervised visitation twice a month." Mike's heart swelled with a mix of relief and sorrow. This was the outcome he had fought for, but he took no pleasure in Emma losing full access to her mother. The judge continued, "Furthermore, Rachel Thompson is ordered to pay child support in the amount of $800 per month." From across the courtroom, Mike heard Rachel's sharp intake of breath. He knew this would be a significant financial burden, given her current unemployment, but he also knew that Emma deserved that support. Finally, the family home is awarded to Michael Thompson to provide stability for the minor child. As the gavel struck, marking the official end of their marriage, Mike felt a chapter of his life close. He turned to Patricia and shook her hand, thanking her for her expert handling of the case. Outside the courthouse, Mike paused on the steps, taking a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. He had won the battle, but it felt like a hollow victory. The true challenge lay ahead, building a new life for himself and Emma from the ashes of the old one. In the weeks that followed, Mike focused on securing their future. He used his share of the divorce settlement wisely, first paying off the remaining mortgage on the house. As he signed the final payment, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This house, once filled with pain, would now be a safe, secure place for him and Emma, free of debt. Next, he set up a college fund for Emma. "Your future is important," he told her, as he showed her the account statement. "I want you to have every opportunity, no matter what." Emma's eyes welled up with tears as she hugged him tightly. These moments of connection, born from the shared struggles they had faced, were precious to Mike. The remainder of the settlement went toward home improvements. Mike and Emma spent their weekends transforming their home, painting the walls, replacing the old carpets with hardwood floors, and planting a small vegetable garden in the backyard. Every little change, no matter how minor, felt like a fresh beginning. At work, Mike's professionalism throughout his personal struggles hadn't gone unnoticed. One afternoon, his supervisor called him into the office, an unusual occurrence that initially filled Mike with unease. Thompson, the supervisor, said, leaning back in his chair, "I've been really impressed with how you've conducted yourself these past months. Despite everything going on in your personal life, your work hasn't suffered. In fact, you've been one of our most dependable employees." Mike nodded, unsure of where this was leading. "We've got a supervisory position that's become available," his supervisor continued. "I'd like you to consider applying for it. It comes with a raise and more flexible hours, which could be beneficial for you and Emma." The promotion was unexpected, but it was a welcome opportunity. The increased flexibility in his schedule allowed Mike to be more present for Emma attending her soccer games and school events without needing to rearrange his work hours. Beyond that, Mike found real fulfillment in mentoring younger postal workers. He saw a bit of himself in them and took pride in helping them navigate the job's challenges. 2 years after the divorce, Mike heard through mutual friends about Rachel. She had moved to another state, starting fresh in a new city where her past was unknown. She had found an entry-level job and was slowly rebuilding her career from the ground up. The most surprising news was that Rachel had started therapy, working through the issues that had led to her infidelity. Mike experienced a swirl of emotions upon hearing this lingering anger, yes, but also a faint hope that Rachel was finally facing her problems. Emma, now in college, had a complicated but improving relationship with her mother. They spoke on the phone every couple of weeks, gradually rebuilding the trust that had been destroyed. During school breaks, Emma occasionally visited Rachel, and their relationship began to evolve into a more adult dynamic. Despite his personal feelings toward Rachel, Mike supported these interactions. He understood that Emma needed both parents in her life, even though the family they once knew was gone for good. "How was your visit with your mom?" Mike would ask when Emma returned from these trips, always keeping his tone neutral and encouraging. Emma would usually shrug, a small smile appearing on her face. "It was okay," she'd reply. "Better than last time. We're working on it." As time went by, Mike found himself reflecting on the journey they had traveled. One crisp autumn morning, while preparing for a fishing trip with Emma, he realized something deeply significant. He was happy. It wasn't the naive, unquestioning happiness of his early marriage, but a more profound sense of contentment. He had come out of the turmoil of betrayal and divorce stronger and more sure of himself. Though he had dated casually in the past few years, his primary focus remained on his relationship with Emma and his own personal growth. As they drove to the lake, the same lake Mike had been heading to the day he discovered Rachel's affair, he glanced at Emma in the passenger seat. She was no longer the hurt, confused teenager she had been during the divorce. She had blossomed into a resilient, compassionate young woman who had faced hardship and emerged stronger for it. They arrived at the lake just as the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow across the still water. Mike showed Emma how to bait her hook, his hands steady as he guided hers. "You know," he said as they cast their lines into the water, "I used to come here with my dad when I was around your age. He taught me everything I know about fishing." Emma smiled, a genuine and unguarded expression that warmed Mike's heart. "And now you're teaching me," she replied. "It's like a family tradition." Mike nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, it is a new tradition for our new life." As they sat in comfortable silence, waiting for the fish to bite, Mike looked over at his daughter. He saw the strong, kind young woman she was becoming and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The road had been long and filled with pain and betrayal, but as the sun climbed higher, warming their faces and glittering on the lake's surface, Mike knew they had come through the storm. They weren't untouched by it, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and with a deep appreciation for the bond they shared. In that peaceful moment, with his daughter by his side and the calm lake stretching out before them, Mike Thompson felt true peace. The silent storm had passed, and in its wake, a new day had dawned. And that brings our story to a close. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and click on the video that's on the screen now. I'll see you there.